Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I am the one stepping behind the mic this week to let you in on what's been happening during the second trimester of my pregnancy, and also to keep you in the loop about our big life update. For those who haven't seen it on Instagram or on Facebook, we are now a full-time traveling family. We are traveling around Australia in a caravan, and so therefore that has changed the way my maternity care was set to be in the first pregnancy update, if you've listened to that one. And then I'll take you through how I am preparing for this upcoming birth, what I am doing, what I am reading, and also, very importantly, what I am doing to prepare for my postpartum, because this is something I didn't do well last time and that I really want to try and learn from my mistakes, so to speak, and try and do better this time around. And obviously, living in a caravan, it will look slightly different to the way my postpartum looked last time. There will be a few little arrangements that will have to be made there to accommodate for the decreased space, let's say. On a side note, if you're interested in hearing more about our traveling life and how we are doing it with a toddler and then with a newborn as well, then let me know, because I am thinking of doing a separate series about that. So if you're interested, leave me a comment or send me a message on my socials. And now I will leave you with the episode. I hope you enjoy it. You are listening to Cuppa with a Doula. I'm your host, Alicia, exercise physiologist and doula. And every week I chat with a mum or mum-to-be about all things pregnancy, birth, and parenting. The stories you will hear in this podcast are real and sometimes raw, but they are all told without any taboo. So grab yourself a cuppa, put your earphones in, relax, and enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. This week I am the one stepping behind the mic and I will be the one telling my story of my current pregnancy. So for those who haven't seen it, I did a part 1 pregnancy series where I was basically giving you guys a bit of an update on how my third pregnancy was going and what was happening, the model of care I was going through, how I was feeling, and all of that. So if you haven't listened to it, then I'll put in the show notes and you can have a listen to that one first, so that everything I'm going to say now makes a little bit more sense, because this is part 2 where I'm taking you through what's been happening and how is my second trimester going with this current pregnancy. So I guess taking a really, really big step back. So since the first update, so I was just entering the second trimester back then, and my plan back then was I was living in Queensland and I was going to go through the same hospital that I birthed my daughter at, and I was going to go through a midwifery group practice program. This has completely changed since. So let me update you on what's been happening. So very big and huge life change. We have sold our home and we are currently traveling full-time in our caravan with a toddler who's currently 19 months old. And yes, this probably sounds quite interestingly crazy to some people. We made that decision to travel because, well, we want to see Australia and we think it's traveling with a toddler and then obviously traveling with then a newborn will be quite interesting. But I think it's a great age. There's no friends yet. They don't have the attachment to having friends. There is no school, which is a really big one. There is no need to even think about things like homeschooling or kindergarten or anything like that. And it was a good opportunity for us. You know, the things aligned in our life so that we could actually do it. So we sold everything and we've sold belongings, everything. We live in our caravan full time. We have all our stuff in here. This is all we own, and it's both exciting and daunting at the same time. But there you go. That's how it is. So in terms of therefore living in a caravan full time, it's made this pregnancy really interesting for a few reasons. So, being full time travelers, we're not basically based in one location specifically. And even though we have picked a hospital to birth at and we plan to be, I guess, stationary for at least a month that we're due, while it's not that month yet, we are traveling. So, therefore, it's what I found is when I was going through that midwifery group practice program, which is really good, obviously, and I really, really loved it with my first birth. It was really, really good. What I found was there was a lot of appointments, right? And that's quite good because they see you quite regularly, and then you really get to know your midwife, and it's excellent. But the problem I found was they don't really cater for people like us who travel, and so therefore basically we kind of would have to fit the appointments into our traveling, so therefore we couldn't really go too far because then we'd have to be back for those appointments and so on, and that's not what I wanted. So I mean, I wanted continuity of care, but I didn't want to be tied down to staying in the one place and just only being able to go short distances out in there and then having to come back to then do the appointments. The other thing I found is also this time around, it was hard for me to see the midwife in my home because I didn't have a home, and being in the caravan, it's a tiny space. It's just not ideal, really, especially when we're all living in the tiny space. So not having a home and telling them that I would come into the hospital for the appointments, somehow that became a really big problem for them, and they were kind of pushing back and saying, no, the appointments need to be at your home because that's our philosophy and this is how the program best works and so on. And so even though early on I was given the option to either come into the hospital or have my appointments at home, and I chose to have my appointments at the hospital, somehow that option disappeared. And as you would know from if you've been listening to the podcast and probably my interviewing style, you'd probably know that I push back and I don't just go, oh, okay, well, I'll make you fit into my schedule. Honestly, it was causing a lot more stress for me than it was benefiting me, and that was only in my first trimester or in my first and second trimester where my appointments were still quite spaced out. So we decided that that wasn't the place to birth. So therefore, I'm not birthing in Queensland and I'm not birthing in a midwifery group practice because it just wasn't working for me. So I think I was maybe around 16 weeks when I realized that I felt all this stress every time there was something linked to the hospital. So I had to make an appointment, or I had to reschedule an appointment, or I had to talk to them about my pregnancy results and all of that. I really felt physically stressed and just really anxious. And so anyway, at 16 weeks, I kind of went, you know what, if I'm stressed now, and it shouldn't be a stressful process, it shouldn't be that way. And if that wasn't working for us, that was the really big thing. It just wasn't working with our lifestyle choice. And I know that obviously the way we're choosing to live now is not common. Most people have a home, they live in an area, they birth in a hospital, they birth at home, whatever the option is. But our situation is extremely, extremely uncommon. And it's, I get it. It's kind of hard to visualize everything it entails. But basically, at 16 weeks, I looked at other options because, from listening to the podcast and all of that, you'd know that I'm a really big advocate to, if it's not working for you, then is there something else that might work, something different? And so therefore, even though I was 16 weeks and I was like, oh, it's, getting a spot in a midwifery group practice is amazing, and it's not accessible to everyone. It's not widely available enough, and I was lucky to be in one, but it just wasn't working for me. So I decided that I just had to give up my spot to someone who, it might work better for them. So there you go. So at 16 weeks, I went back to the drawing board, and we're lucky to have family in New South Wales. And so therefore I've never birthed in New South Wales, and obviously that's interstate from Queensland, and I knew nothing about their birthing system. And I just called a hospital that was local to where our family's staying, and I basically transferred my care over to that hospital. And for anyone who's wondering if you can do that, of course you can do that. You can definitely transfer your care at any point in your pregnancy, even if you're, well into your third trimester, or even if you're birthing next week, really. Because if you're not happy with the level of care you're getting, and you're not happy with your care providers, especially, like me in the first trimester, how would that have been different, and how would that have played out during the birth, really? So basically I will be birthing in New South Wales, and I am going through it's almost like a midwifery group practice program. They just call it something different, but it's basically, instead of having one midwife assigned to you, you're assigned to a small group of midwives, but you do have that continuity of care. And because I wasn't sure, because when I arrived at the hospital and I actually had my very first antenatal appointment, I was already 25 weeks pregnant at that point, so a little bit later than they would have liked, obviously, but that wasn't a problem. And so because I didn't know if I'd get into that program, obviously being so far into my pregnancy, I actually reached out to a student midwife, just so that in case I couldn't get into a continuity of care program, I would have this one person in labor that I would know, and that would be my student midwife. So I've got a student midwife as well. There is an episode coming up with a student midwife for Cuppa with a Pro, but the way I found her was I went on Facebook, and there is a Facebook group called a student midwife, and I posted on there saying where I would birth, when I was due, and then she reached out to me saying that she was available for that time, and therefore we connected, we had a phone call, and there you go. And so she will be also hopefully in the birthing suite, and she will be a familiar face she will know my birthing options, what I'd prefer, and so on. And so there you go. This is how I'm ensuring that I'm getting continuity of care for my pregnancy, so that I'm not just walking into a hospital in full-blown labor and then meeting my midwife for the first time, and she doesn't know me, I don't know her, we don't have any sort of rapport built. And, obviously when you're in full-blown labor, you've got other things to do to build rapport. So I guess that's the very big update on my second trimester. What's been interesting, though, is navigating a change of care interstate. So what I found to be really tricky is basically the way Queensland Health works and the way New South Wales Health works is different. They just don't talk to each other. So therefore, when it came to transferring my care over, what I did is I went to my GP and I asked her to write a referral to this hospital in New South Wales. And then I asked her to also transfer all the information related to this current pregnancy and previous ones. So she was the one that would send over the information, because Queensland Health just doesn't do that. They just don't send over your information to New South Wales Health. Who knows? And so in saying that, what's really important is follow up with your GP and follow up on whether if you're going to do the same thing, or you have to transfer your care before the baby's born or after the baby's born, and you need some documents sent over to your new hospital, your new GP, or specialist. Please make sure that you follow up with whoever is meant to send those documents over, because in my case, I found that I called up the hospital to check that they had received my file, and they hadn't, basically. And that was because my GP didn't know how to do it. So she just did not do it. So, if this is your situation, call up. Because if I hadn't called up, I wouldn't have known that my file actually hadn't been transferred. And so therefore, when I would have arrived, they would have had no idea who I was and, what was happening, really. So, so it's entirely doable, but you need basically a middleman that sends over your file to the specialist, the hospital, GP who you're going to see next. So then that leads me on to my next topic, which is, so now in this hospital, I'm feeling a lot more relaxed. And from all of my interviews and everything, I do tell all my guests and all the listeners that you need to feel really comfortable with your birthing choices and with your birthing stuff, because the midwives, the obstetrician, they're going to be there at your birth. So if you're not comfortable with them, is there something else, another option? Can you do something different? Can you bring in maybe another support person? Whatever the option is, right? So now that I've transferred over my care, I'm feeling a lot more relaxed in that hospital, and we are planning to have a hospital birth, hopefully intervention free, drug free, like my first birth was, and be very undisturbed. Only have hopefully a midwife that I know, and then my student midwife, and obviously my partner in the room, and that's the plan. And so, in saying that, that actually leads me to a bit of a spoiler alert, where I will have in a few weeks' time, there will be an episode coming out with Catherine Bell from the book The Birth Map, and I will therefore do a pregnancy series part 3, where I will talk through how I'm mapping my upcoming birth and what pathways I'm exploring and what different options. Obviously, we know that birth is extremely unpredictable, so how I'm navigating those different options and so on, after chatting with Catherine from the Birth Map. In terms of the actual pregnancy, so we don't know the sex of the baby by choice. We don't want to know. We didn't find out for our daughter. I definitely thought she was a boy. She's not a boy. So we decided again to not find out. So far we haven't. That's really good. Any scans we get done, I go, please don't tell us the sex. I don't want to know. And so far everyone's been great. So that's excellent. Major difference is, so this time around I'm a lot less active in terms of exercise. We obviously have a lot going on. It's a different lifestyle, but it doesn't excuse my lack of activity, and I am trying to get back on the horse and actually do more exercise through the week. I'm not doing really good at it so far, but so therefore I'm less active. I'm definitely feeling it in that I've been getting sometimes a bit of backache or a bit of sciatica. So that's actually my big reminder when I get those, that I have not exercised in at least 5 days or a week. And at that point, it's my body saying, come on, you're slacking off. So there you go. I don't know if I'm feeling bigger than I was with my first pregnancy. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I am bigger, but I mean, it's hard to tell from photos, right? Like I took all these photos, and then I'm trying to put like photos then and now side by side, and I just can't tell, right? I don't know. But I'm definitely feeling like this baby is sitting a lot higher. And at the moment, maybe you can hear it, but I'm feeling a bit short of breath, really. When I'm seated, I just feel like I have this huge watermelon that's moving everything up. And so I'm feeling a bit restricted sometimes. The other thing in which goes with my lack of activity is I'm also finding that it's more difficult for me to connect to my pelvic floor. So I am finding I have to do extra work there to kind of get that connection back, and therefore be able to prepare my pelvic floor and prepare the whole relaxation phase during pushing. So I am working on trying to do pretty much every day, but I'm not doing enough of that. So I'm trying to every day try and connect to my pelvic floor and just both strengthen at this time, even though, so I'm currently 28 weeks at the time of this recording. So I do need to be strengthening my pelvic floor to obviously to help with the weight of this baby and try and keep up, with continence and so on. But I am also working on obviously relaxation, because that will become a really big thing in a few weeks' time, where I will need to be very much connected to my pelvic floor and able to relax it, so that in the pushing phase, I don't have any problem there. Another symptom I'm getting, again, with the fact that I feel like I have a watermelon that's riding up and making it really difficult to breathe, is I think I'm getting reflux, which is a first. I didn't have that before, and it is extremely uncomfortable. I've heard women talk about reflux, and I can only imagine. At the time, I could only imagine how annoying and really, really not good that was. But now I can also experience it. So there you go, getting reflux. It's absolutely terrible. So far, I'm still sleeping well, so I'm touching the skin because I've got no wood around, that it continues because I'm a very big sleeper. Actually, I can sleep through a lot of things. So I'm fairly confident that my sleep will be fine. I can probably sleep through me having reflux as well. So that's good. But I am feeling quite tired at the moment. So I am feeling like I need a bit more sleep than usual, and I'm having trouble to get up early in the morning. So that's probably another symptom there. But I mean, who knows, right? Whether it's the pregnancy, whether it's having a toddler, probably a combination of both, who knows, right? The next thing I wanted to touch on is birth education. So the first time around, the way I educated myself for my birth was, obviously I had a known midwife, so that really played a really big part in my birth education because we discussed a lot options, and we discussed a lot what they meant and so on, right? And also, what I did back then was I was listening to a lot of podcasts and listening to a lot of birth stories. I listened to a variety of birth stories, actually, not just positive ones, not just hospital ones. I listened to also the ones that are deemed, I guess, traumatic, or which didn't always have a good ending, let's say. And I think for me, I kind of need to, I love having knowledge, right? So I love knowing about everything. And even when the outcome isn't great, I think it keeps it real, because obviously we know that birth is, with birth comes death as well. That is a possibility. And I just like to keep that, I guess, in my head, even though, I don't want to think about my baby dying all the time. But I think I like to know that. So yeah, so I think I listen to a variety of birth birth podcasts and birth variations, because it's back then, well, obviously I knew I wanted a hospital birth. I wanted to try and have a physiological birth with no drugs and no intervention, and that's what I had. But I mean, as a first time mom, I didn't know how we'd go with the surges and how it would feel and whether I could even handle it, right? So therefore, I listened to birthing podcast where they talked about getting the epidural and using other drugs, or those where there was an emergency C-section or a planned C-section or so on, because you just never know, right? Like sometimes, everything is looking fine, and then at the last minute something changes, and potentially you've got to explore other pathways, other avenues. So this time around, I'm also doing the same. I'm listening to a fair bit of birth podcasts as well. I mean, on top of doing my own, and therefore getting to listen to each story twice. Once when I record it, second time when I edit it. So I get to listen to a lot of birth story through my podcast, but otherwise I do listen to other birth podcasts. Actually, I am hoping to have a similar birth, again, hospital based, with pretty much no intervention, and again, drug free. This time around, the way I'm preparing for it is I'm currently reading an incredible book by Holly de Cruz, which is called Your Baby, Your Birth. And I've absolutely been loving this book, which is all about hypnobirthing and the principles. And it's really interesting because with my first birth, I did the She Birth course. And I found it really good, and I used some of the tools in birth, actually, and in the third trimester. So I think I did the course in the middle half of my second trimester, and I finished it early into the third trimester. And I used some of the tools, I practiced them often, and then I used some of those tools in labor, actually. And reading this book, it's reminding me of what I did, because even though my last birth was less than 2 years ago now, there's still things that, I've forgotten, right? And I don't remember doing that. But then when I read about the principles in that book, I go, oh, yeah, I did that. Or, oh, I remember practicing this and practicing the breath and practicing the connection with the pelvic floor and visualization and so on. So I'm reading this book and it's amazing, and it's a really great refresher for me. And it's also helping me to kind of go, okay, I need to practice doing that. What's really interesting is obviously back before my first birth, I found it really easy to basically practice those tools and practice and be active and practice doing my visualization and meditation and so on. Whereas now I'm not prioritizing well enough, but having a toddler, it's like it's a whole new level of trying to fit that in. So I'm trying to find a way to fit in my birth practice into a regular schedule, so it's not just when I remember. I'm trying to associate it with something I do on a regular basis, which is still proving to be quite challenging. But there you go. Here is a message for you if you're pregnant, and practicing your birth skills is important, and it's definitely really useful to read it. And the other thing is with reading this book, and now, so I know what I did for my first preparation for my first birth and what I did during my first birth. So now I've got this extra insight. When I read those principles, I go, oh yeah, they're definitely super helpful because I remember doing it. And I remember almost the stage I was in at the time, and so I'd be like, oh yeah, that was really good before transition, or that was really good in transition. So therefore I can reflect back and go, oh yeah, definitely need to practice those because that really helped me. So I think it's good to have that insight and to be able to reflect on what I did and what I did well on. So, I practiced and all of that. And then I used some of those during my labor, so that was good. But there are some things I didn't do in my first birth that I'm planning to, well, I'm hoping to do. One of those things is affirmation. So I don't feel like I practiced affirmations enough. I think I did a lot of visualization. I needed to visualize the space and visualize the surges and associate them with, for me, it was waves, and that made sense. But I don't think I practiced affirmations, and that's something I want to practice this time around because I found as I got closer to transition and then into the pushing phase, that is when I needed those and I didn't have them. And that's when I pretty much, that's when I hit a wall, really, to put it that way. And that was really hard to get over that, actually. And as many other listeners would know from transition is such a tricky time, really, where you're almost working against yourself and telling yourself that you can't do it and that you've had enough and you just need all the drugs and or the C-section, and you just cannot do it any other ways. It's really tricky. So I'm hoping this time around to practice finding my affirmation, not just Googling affirmations. I need to find what really resonates with me, what really makes sense to me, and then practice those so that on the day, if they're said to me by my partner or my midwife, I'll go, okay, yeah, I can do it. I can definitely do it. Okay. Because sometimes that's all you need. You just need someone to remind you that you're doing awesome. You're doing so good. You've come this far so that you can do it. And that's all you need. So there you go. So the other book I'm reading is The Birth Map by Catherine Bell, which I've been meaning to read it for a bit, and then now perfect time to read about it, actually. And it's really well written, and you'll see there will be the interview with Catherine Bell coming up on the podcast soon, actually. And so she's written it in such a way that she's an academic, but she's written it in a non-academic way, and it's a great book to help you explore your options and to really explore the different pathways and have the most positive birth experience, regardless of what that experience looks like. And it's about being informed, knowing your choices, knowing your options, and being the one in charge and actually making those decisions without those decisions being made for you during labor, for example. So that's been a really good book, and hence I'm talking about mapping my birth, and I'm not talking about birth preferences this time around. So I did have actually birth preferences for my first birth, and that was mostly, obviously I had a known midwife and she knew what we wanted and so on. It was mostly maybe a refresher for her, but mostly in case she couldn't be at my birth. And therefore I wrote them down and I printed that out, and I had it with me during labor in case she wasn't the one who could attend my birth. But yeah, in hindsight, it was really long, and there was a lot of wording, and I'm definitely going to do it differently this time around, because, well, I'm hoping that the midwife I will have will know me. But as I said, it's a group of a few midwives, so I obviously don't know which one I will get, and then I will share that and discuss it with my student midwife as well, who I'm hoping will be there too. And so therefore, hopefully my student midwife is there, so she will know my birth map. And yeah, and so there you go. She can be another advocate on top of my partner being the best advocate ever. So in terms of my first birth, I know I keep talking about it and you guys have no idea what happened, because I have not posted my own birth story. I have not recorded it. I need to do it. I know I've said that in the first part and I still haven't done it. I've been prioritizing everyone else's birth story since. So my first birth story is coming up, and it will be actually a really good way for me to reflect on this birth and to just, I think, have a deeper understanding of what happened. And there are some things where it could have been done differently, I feel. Not really in terms of how the birth unfolded, but in terms of how I felt and in terms of how I labored, I feel. And so it will be a really good exercise for me to record my birth story in as much details as I can remember, because it will help me to, I guess, put the words out there, and that will help me to reflect and kind of analyze it in a different light. So I am planning on doing that, and then I'm planning on releasing it, so you will know soon enough how my first birth unfolded. But as I said, it was a hospital birth in a midwifery group practice where there was no intervention. I didn't have any drugs, and the outcome was really positive for sure. And so lastly, the last thing I want to talk about in this second part, in how I am preparing for, this pregnancy, this birth, is last time I prepared really well I prepared well for my pregnancy. I was very well informed. I was well informed for my birth. I was a really good advocate. I knew my options and so on. So this time around, obviously I've still got that knowledge of, pregnancy, birth, but this time around, last time I didn't prepare well for my postpartum, aka even though I knew that the baby would be born, I didn't plan anything to do with postpartum. The only thing I had planned was I had meal prepped, and I had a fair few meals. I think I didn't cook for about 2 months, so that wasn't too bad, and we didn't have a meal train, so that wasn't too bad actually. I had frozen like a lot of meals, really. We had even bought a bigger freezer so that I could freeze a lot of meals. So this time around, I'm really planning to plan my postpartum, because now I know that obviously pregnancy and birth is important, but it's only a snapshot in time, whereas postpartum is forever. And transitioning from having just one toddler to now having a toddler and a newborn, it would be better if I was prepared for this, really. I know a lot of people say the hardest transition is the 0, so no children, to 1. And I mean, that was definitely challenging. That was really hard, because I didn't know what to expect. And, at first it is kind of hard to find your feet, or at least it was for me. And so I've got that knowledge now of what it's like to have a newborn, the sleepless night. You're feeling completely out of your routine, so to speak, and obviously all the challenges it comes with. But obviously it's extremely beautiful as well, don't get me wrong. And so this time around I'm planning my postpartum. So the way I'm doing it is meal prepping again, definitely, because that was that was huge to just be able to not cook for 2 months. That was great. Unfortunately, this time around, because we're in a caravan, our freezer's a lot smaller. So I will not be able to freeze that many meals, but I'm freezing some now and I'm thinking about clever ways to freeze even more. But anyway, so that's step one of me preparing my postpartum. Second way I'm preparing for my postpartum is sleeping arrangement in a caravan, right? So we've got two bunks, which is perfect for having two children. But I am thinking about, and I know this is a controversial subject, but we are thinking about co-sleeping and we are trying to see what the best option is. I'm planning on breastfeeding. So obviously having the baby really next to me would be super helpful for breastfeeding, and it would also, being in such a small space, obviously, and our toddler is a great sleeper, but obviously if the baby, the newborn, starts screaming at night at 2 a.m., she will wake up as well. So the idea of we're kind of exploring co-sleeping and seeing what that could look like, and seeing if by doing that I can establish a really good milk supply, and we can also prevent potentially the toddler from waking up every hour and having to resettle to babies, or toddler and a newborn. So to compare it, the first time around we had our daughter slept in a cot from day one, but the cot was right next to our bed. So therefore it was easy enough to pick her up, put her in the bed, breastfeed, and then put her back in her bed. And she rarely slept in our bed, mostly because I was worried about risks of suffocation, choking, the blanket being over her face, and so on. But I think this time around, I really want to explore it to do it safely, because it can be done safely. And there are really great websites these days like Red Nose, which really give you tips on how to keep your sleeping space safe when you have a newborn, if you wish to co-sleep. So considering that option, seeing what that could look like, and hoping that it will have great benefits in terms of us being able to be less sleep deprived, the toddler not being as sleep deprived, and me establishing breastfeeding as well. And the other thing that's also linked to sleeping a newborn is naps. So back with my first, we had not a strict schedule, but we would go with her cues and she would be put down for naps, and we would just, sometimes she slept for, a few hours, sometimes she didn't sleep at all. So we would just go with whatever she was putting down, basically. And it wasn't, again, like I said on the podcast, we didn't try and fit a rigid schedule on her. We followed her cues, and as you would know, if you've had a newborn, their sleep pattern is unpredictable. They will just sleep when they sleep, and they won't sleep when they won't sleep. And back then we also did a lot of contact naps. So I think definitely for the first 4 months, she used to contact nap at least once a day, if not more. Definitely as a teeny tiny baby, she used to sleep on me all the time. And then at some point she would go to sleep in her cot through the day when that was doable, obviously. And so this time around, I'm planning to do a lot of contact naps again, but with us still wanting to travel, and obviously we'll have the baby, but then we'll actually continue to travel. So pace of traveling might change there, but I think we'll still be traveling anyway. And so therefore the naps will look a lot different, because I think we'll try and fit the naps around the driving time. Obviously being aware that you don't want to be driving for 6 hours when you have a newborn, but that's not how we're traveling at the moment anyway. We're not traveling for extended hours in the car. But so that will be really interesting, to be traveling and trying to fit both the newborn and the toddler, and kind of hope that they're nap sinks at some point, so they're both hopefully asleep. Yeah, with my first, what we did as well is she would sleep in a very dark room. She would have the white noise on. We'd be quiet around the house and so on. And so this time around, it'll be completely different, because we will probably have trouble to achieve a dark space. It will be dark-ish. You can make it darkish, but through the day there'll still be some light coming through. But the noise factor will be the biggest thing, because living in the caravan obviously will have a toddler running around too, who obviously doesn't have any idea of what being quiet is for a nap. So she will be making some noise, and there will be some noise from being around wherever we are. If we're in a caravan park, or wherever we are, there will be noise from outside. So it will be quite interesting to see how we can navigate naps and sleep so that everyone is as rested as possible and everyone is as happy as possible too. Yeah, and then the last thing I wanted to touch on is, so back during my first pregnancy update, I was still breastfeeding my toddler actually, and so she was at the time 16 months old, I think, and she was still breastfeeding a few times a day, mostly for sleeps actually, so that would help her to fall asleep. But then big update is when she was about 18 months old, I think she got an ear infection, and she got really sick from it, and she didn't breastfeed during that time, I think because of the ear infection being so painful. I don't know if she had latching issues, or if it made it more difficult to latch and then to suck. And then from there on, she never wanted the breast again. So she has actually weaned herself abruptly at 18 months old. So I'm not breastfeeding anymore, which has been really good actually. I didn't know if I wanted to wean her. I didn't know what I wanted to do in that regard. And I was really happy to kind of go with her cues again and kind of be led by that. I actually had no intention to wean her. I would have been happy to tandem feed and have both the newborn and the toddler feeding at the same time. I was thinking a lot about how that was going to look and how I was going to navigate it, but I would have been happy to have the experience. But no need. There you go. My daughter has weaned herself. I got really lucky that because it was so sudden, I obviously wasn't expecting it. And I got so lucky that I didn't get mastitis, because for more than a few days, she wasn't feeding at all. And I could feel that I was getting really full. And I even tried to express, and I couldn't express anything. So I was a bit worried there, but I didn't get mastitis. I didn't even feel, I felt like my milk just disappeared basically overnight. And I don't know if it's also linked to the pregnancy, where maybe I was at a stage where my milk was drying up. I'm actually not sure. But yeah, until that point, my daughter was happy to feed for her before her naps, and that would help her to fall asleep. And then now she's totally happy to not be breastfeeding. She hasn't been asking for it. She's basically weaned herself naturally at a time that made sense to her, and so that's how it is. So now I'm quite happy about it now in hindsight, because I feel like I'm getting a bit of a rest, and it's like my body's mine now, and I don't have someone stuck to it twice a day. So that's pretty good. And I actually didn't know that I would feel so happy about not breastfeeding anymore, because I really enjoyed it, and it's been a really good journey. 18 months to me is amazing. I didn't even think I'd make it past 3 months. It was really hard when we started. So I'm really happy, and I'm really happy to have my body back for a few more months until this new baby arrives, and hopefully I can breastfeed as well. I'm planning to express colostrum in the later stage of my pregnancy, around 37 weeks. So I will keep you updated on how that goes. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this this update on my second trimester. So as I said, I'm currently 28 weeks, so I'm always recording those a bit late. So I'm actually stepping into my third trimester now. So that's a really good time to recap on this, and I will keep you updated on everything that happens in the next trimester. But for now, thank you for listening, and I will also bring you my birth story at some point. It will be live. I will put it on my Instagram, and you'll know when it's coming up. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested in how, in us traveling as a family, raising a toddler and a newborn in a caravan, let me know, because I have been thinking about doing a little separate series on basically being a family on the road, because I know that some people are thinking about it and they're just not sure how to go about it, if it's even doable, and so on. So if you want a little separate series on that, I can definitely do it. Just let me know in the comment if that's something that you'd be interested in hearing more about. But otherwise, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next week with a brand new episode. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to get notified of when a new episode comes out, please subscribe to this show on your podcast listening platform. Also, I would really appreciate it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcast or share this episode so that other moms can find it. If you would like to tell your own pregnancy, birth, or parenting story, please head to the show notes and you will find a form there to get in touch with me. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I will be with you again next week for a new episode.